The sky was on fire, and the world would never be the same. December 7th, 1941, a quiet Sunday morning in Hawaii, until the sky roared with death. In just under 2 hours, the world changed forever. This was not just an attack, was a message, a gamble, and the spark that would ignite America's fury. But why? Why would Japan risk awakening a giant like the United States? The answer lies in desperation and ambition. Japan was an empire hungry for resources, steel, rubber. By the late 1930s, its war in China drained supplies, and American sanctions tightened the noose. Without oil from the US, Japan's military machine would grind to a halt. For Japan's leaders, the choice seemed clear: submit or strike. Enter Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the mastermind behind a bold and terrifying plan. Instead of waiting for war to come to Japan, he would deliver a crushing blow first. 6 aircraft carriers, more than 350 planes, a surprise attack designed to cripple the US Pacific Fleet before it could even fight. The plan relied on speed, secrecy, and total destruction. If successful, Japan hoped America would lose the will to fight. But Yamamoto himself had doubts, famously warning that Japan could run wild for 6 months, but beyond that, the outcome was uncertain. At 7:55 a.m., the first wave struck. Torpedoes ripped through battleships. Bombs fell like rain. Within minutes, the USS Arizona exploded in a fireball, killing over 1,000 men instantly. By the time the second wave retreated, 8 battleships were damaged or destroyed. More than 2,400 Americans were dead. Pearl Harbor was in ruins. But instead of breaking America's spirit, the attack united it. The very next day, President Franklin D. Roosevelt called it a date which will live in infamy. Congress declared war. America's vast industry awakened, pouring out ships, planes, and tanks in numbers Japan could never match. Pearl Harbor was meant to silence America, did the opposite. It sealed Japan's fate. The attack on Pearl Harbor was a calculated risk, born from a complex web of geopolitical tensions and resource scarcity. Japan, an island nation with limited natural resources, had embarked on an aggressive expansion across Asia. This imperial ambition, however, came at a cost. As Japan's war machine consumed more and more resources, particularly oil, it found itself in a precarious position. The United States, alarmed by Japan's actions in China and Southeast Asia, responded with economic sanctions. These measures, particularly the oil embargo, threatened to strangle Japan's military capabilities. Faced with the prospect of a crippled empire, Japan's leaders saw only 2 options: back down from their expansionist goals or take a desperate gamble to secure the resources they needed. Admiral Yamamoto's plan for Pearl Harbor was audacious in its scope and ambition. By striking at the heart of America's Pacific naval power, Japan hoped to buy itself time to consolidate its gains in Asia and establish a defensive perimeter that would be too costly for the United States to breach. The element of surprise was crucial. Without it, the entire operation would be doomed to failure. As the Japanese strike force sailed across the Pacific, maintaining radio silence, the tension must have been palpable. Every sailor, every pilot knew that the fate of their nation hung in the balance. The success or failure of this mission would determine whether Japan would rise as a dominant power in the Pacific or face crushing defeat. The attack itself was a masterpiece of military planning and execution. The first wave of Japanese planes caught the Americans completely off guard. Battleships, lined up neatly in port, made perfect targets. The air was filled with the screech of diving planes, the thunder of explosions, and the cries of the wounded and dying. As news of the attack spread, shock gave way to anger across the United States. Pearl Harbor had not just been a military target, it was a symbol of American power in the Pacific. Its destruction was a blow to national pride, a challenge that could not go unanswered. In the days that followed, recruitment offices were flooded with young men eager to enlist and avenge the attack. The industrial might of the United States, which had been slowly awakening from the Great Depression, now roared to life with a singular purpose. Factories that had once produced cars now churned out tanks and planes. Shipyards worked around the clock, launching new vessels at an unprecedented rate. The sleeping giant, as Yamamoto had feared, was now fully awake and angry. For Japan, the initial success of Pearl Harbor quickly gave way to a series of setbacks. The aircraft carriers, which would prove to be the decisive weapon of naval warfare in the Pacific, had been absent from Pearl Harbor during the attack. This oversight would come back to haunt Japan at the Battle of Midway just 6 months later, where the tide of the war in the Pacific would turn decisively in America's favor. As the war progressed, the technological and industrial gap between Japan and the United States became increasingly apparent. While Japanese soldiers fought with fanatical determination, they were often outgunned and undersupplied. The vast distances of the Pacific, which Japan had hoped would serve as a defensive buffer, instead became a logistical nightmare as American submarines decimated Japanese shipping. The legacy of Pearl Harbor extends far beyond the immediate military consequences. It reshaped American foreign policy, ending decades of isolationism and thrusting the United States onto the world stage as a superpower. The attack also had profound social impacts within the United States, leading to the controversial internment of Japanese Americans, a dark chapter in the nation's history that would not be fully addressed for decades. For Japan, the aftermath of Pearl Harbor and the subsequent war was catastrophic. Cities were reduced to ashes by firebombing campaigns, culminating in the atomic destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The empire that Japan's leaders had sought to build crumbled, leaving a nation occupied and forced to rebuild from the ashes of defeat. Pearl Harbor was a tragedy, a turning point, and a lesson. It reminds us how ambition, desperation, and miscalculation can shape history. The echoes of that morning in 1941 still resonate across the Pacific. Today, Pearl Harbor stands as a solemn memorial to those who lost their lives on that fateful Sunday morning. Visitors from around the world come to pay their respects and reflect on the consequences of war. The sunken USS Arizona, still leaking oil after all these years, serves as a poignant reminder of the human cost of conflict. The attack on Pearl Harbor teaches us about the dangers of underestimating an adversary and the unpredictable nature of war. It shows how a single event can alter the course of history, setting in motion a chain of events that reshape the world. As we look back on that day, we are reminded of the importance of vigilance, diplomacy, and the heavy price of conflict. If you found this story compelling, join us on more journeys through history's greatest battles and untold stories. Hit that like button and subscribe to War Chronicles Stories where history comes alive.